Well, removing the starter from this 2007 Ford F150 has proven to be a real chore. So the starter is held in with 2 bolts and then a stud that actually has a nut on it. And once I get the starter out in the daylight here, I'll show you exactly what I saw that made me decide that, yeah, I'm not even going to mess around. I'm just going to replace the starter. And then I'll also show you what I had to remove to get it out. But right now, I've got 1 bolt left. That's all that's keeping me from getting the starter out. But that bolt is located on the top of the motor. I'm sorry, on the top of the starter. And it's in a horrible space to get to. So I couldn't get to it from the bottom, no matter how hard I seem to try. I can't seem to get my arm in there. My arms are rather long, but I just can't twist them and make them go around corners the way I need to. So then I thought, well, maybe I could get to it through the wheel well on that last bolt. So here's the liner for the wheel well. Looking through this area right in here on the liner, I could see that there was a space between the frame and the exhaust manifold, and my hope was that further back this way towards the rear of the truck that it would open up more where I could get my hand in there, but I couldn't see it with the liner in the way. So I went through the trouble of taking the liner out, only to discover, unfortunately, that right where I was hoping I was going to be able to get my hand in is also where the manifold ends and turns downward and hooks into the exhaust system. So I can't get my hand in here. You can see how tight this space is. I can't even get my hand in far enough to touch the starter from here. And if I go further back, that doesn't help me because of the fact that the exhaust manifold and the flange and everything is in the way. So that's not working. So the most I can do is with a long screwdriver, I can touch it. So then that led me to think, okay, I think what I need to do is get to it from underneath, but it seems to me that what keeps getting in my way is this cross member. I think I would have a little bit more of an attack angle with my long arm if that cross member wasn't there. Now, the cross member attaches to these mounts with these 2 bolts on this side and the same thing on the other side. So what I'm going to attempt to do is remove the 4 bolts and drop this cross member piece out of the way and see if that gives me the extra room that I need to get in there. So I'm not sure if this is focusing, but probably not. But that's the starter up there. Looking at it from this angle, it almost looks plausible. The problem is, oh yeah, I can get to the whole bottom of it here with my hands. That's how I was able to loosen that stud, take the nut off of that stud, remove the grounding cables, take off the connections to the back of the solenoid here, and even reach up on the side and get an extension with a ratchet in there and get that side bolt out, which you can't even see from this angle. But the one up on the top is just a no-go. Get a little bit more light on the subject maybe. So the problem is, at the back of the starter, there's only a few inches before you hit this mount to the left here, which you can see with all the rust on it. It's this area right in here, it's really tight. But what's also right below that is this cross member. So again, if I get this cross member off, I might be able to get in from this angle long enough, get my arm reached in there far enough to get that extension and socket on there and take that out. So that's the plan. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use a wire wheel on my pneumatic attachment, clean up the threads on the nuts that are on the back sides of these long bolts that go through here, and then I'm going to hit them with some penetrating oil and let that soak. All right, so I cleaned the threads with my wire brush, rotary wire brush, and they actually didn't look very bad at all. everything indicates to me that those bolts have not been in there that long, which means that cross member has been out more recently. And you know, that kind of jives with what we were told about that the transmission had been replaced possibly. The other thing too is the oil pan just looks way too clean, so I didn't really notice whether or not that oil pan that's probably what ended up happening there. I think they put the new oil pan in and had that cross member down for that. So anyways, now I'm going to use a 19 millimeter impact to break those free. Except it's not 19 millimeter, 18 millimeter. I kind of doubt, yeah, I didn't think so. There's no way they would make the head on the other side 18 millimeter. That would just be dirty pool. So those bolts must be just pushed through and are seized in there. So I'm gonna put a 15 millimeter impact on the heads and just see if I can get them to spin. Oh, a lot of rust coming out of there. Oh, these could have benefited from some anti-seize compound. Ooh. Okay. I was able to twist this a little bit sideways, just enough to get that to pop out. Okay, it's really tight under here, so I can barely get the camera into position, but here's the cables I disconnected from the starter already. I'm gonna move those off to the side. So now you can see the starter fairly well. And right here where I'm putting my hand up now, that's about as far as I could get my hand before I took out this member. So you can see I've got my arm behind it. If I try to go in front of it, the torsion bar here stops me from being able to get my hand in really at all. But now, with this cross member out from right here, I might have just enough space here. If I change my angle, I think I can get my arm up further, just not from this side of the truck. Oh boy, so finally, success. I got the starter out. So this area that you see there that's all rusted, that needs to be cleaned up before the new starter is installed. But after I got that last bolt out, which was the bolt that threads into here, right here, this bolt, you see this little carved out area here actually kind of helps you get the socket guided in because you're doing it completely from feel. But it turns out with that cross member off, I was able to get both hands in there at the same time, so I could kind of like feed the socket and extension in from one side and guide it in to get onto the head of the bolt. And then I put the ratchet on, and I'll explain that in a moment when we get out of here. I'll show you the starter and show you what setup I ended up using to get to that, because I almost gave up more than once on this. So with the starter out of the truck, I want to show you the setup that I ended up using to get this out. You've got a problem here where at the end of the starter, there's very little room between the end of the starter here and part of the mount on the frame. So you've got very little room to work here. This is the top side of the starter. You can't see it all when you're trying to work. So what you have to do is you have to get the socket and the extension setup that you're going to use up into position and onto that bolt head first. Then get your ratchet head, sneak your ratchet head up inside here and pop it on. Long handle, you've barely got enough room to swing it. A fine tooth ratchet works well, but you need the longer handle for the braking force to get it broken free. Once you have it broken free, then you can use a stubby ratchet like this, and you can get a lot more movement out of it. But the reason why I'm showing you this is because this little mini extension I have right here, okay, was the lifesaver in this particular instance. Most of you are going to have these little short extensions. Here's two of them put together. And then the long extension like this, right? These are the standard ones you tend to find. If you take one of these long ones with a standard 13 millimeter socket, what ends up happening is you can't get the ratchet on there. It doesn't stick out far enough past this point. So then you figure, okay, I know what I'll do. I'll use a deep 13 millimeter socket. Well, with the deep 13 millimeter socket, what happens is now it sticks out so far that you can't get the ratchet head in there. You're too close to this barrier that's underneath the truck. So every combination I tried didn't seem to work. Then I hit upon the combination of two short extensions, this extra stubby extension, and the small 13 millimeter socket. You can see this sticks out just far enough so that I can get that ratchet head onto there, and I still have enough room to work. Just a little bit too long. So that was the magic elixir for me. So I got to clean up this rusty area here, get a new starter, and we'll go from there. All right, let's take a look at this starter. All right, so when I first got onto the truck yesterday, where the connections are right here, there was a red rubber boot covering this. When I popped the boot off, the first thing I noticed was that I saw all of this green, which told me that this was all corroded. So I knew already I had corroded connections here to deal with. And then I could see some green in this area right here, which now I see this is what's left of the cable that comes out of the solenoid. So the power comes in from a battery cable to here. And when the solenoid is activated by 12 volts being applied to this point right here, contacts in here close and send the 12 volts out through this post, through this cable, which is insulated from the case by this grommet, into here and spins the motor. Simultaneously, while that's happening, the solenoid that slams the contacts closed to apply power to the motor also actuates, pulls this in, like this. This being pulled in will pull this back, which will throw this gear out to engage the flywheel. So it's a simultaneous energize the motor, engage the flywheel, spin the flywheel. The engine starts, you let the key go, this springs back, pulls that pinion gear off of the flywheel, and the motor stops spinning. So this starter is toast. Oh, this casting, I just broke that. When I was fighting to get this out, I was banging on whatever I could bang on, and I banged on this too hard and cracked the casting right off. I'm hoping there isn't a core charge for the starter, because if there is, I think I may have just ruined my core. By the way, if this motor was still good, sometimes you could just replace this for about 30 bucks instead of the whole starter. And depending on the brand of starter you get, I mean, if you buy a cheaper starter, you might be able to buy, like, I think off of Amazon I saw a whole starter for 75 bucks. So would you pay 30 bucks for this when you can get the whole new starter for 75? Well, it depends. How good's the starter? Based on how hard it is to change this flippin' starter, I am definitely not going to look for the cheapest starter out there. I don't want to go with something too cheap. I want to go with something a little bit better quality.
All right, guys, so the new starter has come in. It was shipped to my house. So I went online, and I always like to check multiple sources. We have quite a few auto parts stores very close to us, within this 2-town area. So the big 3 are Napa, Ford. Napa, AutoZone, O'Reilly's, and Advance. So I tend to go to Napa first, and I always like dealing with the counter people there. They're knowledgeable. But in this particular case, the starter that they had in stock was the lower end one. The higher end one wasn't in stock, and it was quite a bit more money. I forget how much it ended up being, because I can only get like a 10% AAA discount there. What I like about Advanced Auto Parts website is almost every time I go to the website, there's a discount code at the top. So it's usually 15% off. And Advance typically lets you use the 15% code, pay for an item that's in stock at the store online, and then just go down and pick it up. So you get that discount, the online discount, even though you're picking up. AutoZone had a 20% discount, but it was shipped to home only. And the thing that was kind of annoying about that, because I ended up going with AutoZone in the end, was that they had this starter in stock at my local store. So I could have gone down there and bought it right there at the store, but they wouldn't give me the 20% discount. So I decided, since it said free next day shipping, since I would have it in one day, I'd wait one day and I'd get 20% off. So they had a few different choices of starters there at AutoZone also, and I ended up going with this more expensive one, the Duralast Gold. It was about a $250 starter, but I got that 20% off, which made it good. And the other reason why I went with this over the slightly cheaper model was the slightly cheaper model had like a $30 core charge. This one only had a $12 core charge. And as you may recall, I may not be able to get my core charge because of the fact that I broke the solenoid mount right off. So, broke the casting. So I figured that alone is probably another good reason to go with this. And this one also has the lifetime warranty and everything. So, and I figured since it's the more expensive series, the Duralast Gold, as opposed to like the Duralast, I think it's called Professional or Premium or whatever, maybe it's got a little bit better quality control or whatever. So here's what the new starter looks like next to the old starter, and it's matching up. Looks like it's a perfect match. So now I get to start the laborious job of putting this back in the vehicle. So this is just kind of curious how they handled this. This is, yeah, that feels like some silicone rubber maybe around the outside of that insulator. Alright, so here goes nothing.
Alright guys, so I ended up getting the starter in. All I've got left to do now is hook up the wiring. I'm going to just clean up these connections right here. A little bit of corrosion that's on them. Make sure I get a really good connection. And then we'll be able to try this thing. I actually found that the new starter went in easier than getting the old one out. I don't know if I'm just getting more used to exactly what angle to lay at and stick my arms in or whatever. I mean, I would say to anybody trying to do this that is really getting frustrated, just don't give up, because I almost gave up twice, and finally I figured out a way. Again, you know, the cross member coming off really helped a lot. And just, you know, depending on how long your arms are, I would say that's going to dictate how high you want to get the vehicle up. If you have a lift, obviously this is much easier. But if you're a shade tree mechanic like me and doing it on the ground, you got to have it at the right height. You might even want to try laying in a couple different positions, you know, parallel to the length of the truck. Might work better for some people. Or I found that I actually had to lay in far enough so that I couldn't even be looking at the starter while working on it to get my arms in at the angles I needed to. So it was pretty much done all by feel, but it worked out pretty well. Installing the new starter, you got to kind of hold it up in position, and I would definitely start this bottom stud first and then not snug it all the way home, and then do the side bolt next, and again not snug it all the way home, close to it though, and that way if you have to twist the starter a little bit, wiggle it a little bit to get the top bolt started, it'll be a lot easier for you. So let me clean up this wiring, hook it up, and we'll have that magical moment and see if this truck runs. All right, let's give this thing a shot. If this starter does work and the engine actually starts, I'm going to be listening very carefully. I'm going to be listening for a few things. First thing is there going to be any very unusual noises at the initial startup that could indicate that there's a problem already with that valve train? The phasers, cam phasers and all that. And then if it starts, we'll wait for it to warm up and see if it starts ticking when it gets hot, because that's another indicator of cam phasers. I think the noise at the beginning is a sign that the tensioners and the guides are junk. And if it's okay at startup and it just ticks at high temperature, that's the ticking of the cam phasers. And then that, depending on who you ask, some people say, yeah, definitely it's a ticking time bomb, and other people are like, no, run it until you have some other problem. We'll see. All right, let's try this thing. All right, so that was interesting. That was a lot of tick, tick, ticking on the passenger side of the motor when I first started it. And then I happened to notice that there's an idler pulley that is not spinning at all. And I think that's in contact with the back side of the serpentine belt. So I'm surprised it's not squealing. So I decided I was going to shut it down because of that pulley. And literally right when I started to move away, the ticking went away altogether. So that's interesting. My first thought was the ticking could be, you could get a ticking noise from a spark plug that's been partially ejected in its bore. You could get a ticking from manifold leak, or you could get a ticking from that valve train situation. Again, I know nothing about Fords other than what I learned and research over the past couple weeks.